Welcome to the Cunningham Piano Show podcast, where we explore the world of pianos and the people behind them. I'm your host, Hugh Sung, and I am so honored to have as my guest today the esteemed pianist Sara Davis Buechner. Sara, welcome to the show.
It is great to be with you, Hugh. I'm so honored to be on the podcast and even live from my modest living room in my downtown Philadelphia apartment. Just like old radio. Perfect.
We are so excited, and one of the big reasons we're having this episode is to announce, of course, you're performing all over the world constantly, but there's a very special concert coming up on Thursday, April 25th, 7:30 p.m. at Merkin Hall in New York City, which is around 67th and Broadway, and is the very special concert. Tell us a little bit more about this upcoming concert.
Yes, that's one of my favorite halls to play in New York, a beautiful, intimate hall with a wonderful acoustic. And 15 years ago, I played there a special recital honoring my 25th year since my debut in New York City in 1984. And now it will be, can you count that high, 40 years, 40 years have gone by since that event. So celebrating that, Merkin is presenting me in a program of special music that means a great deal to me. Music of Mozart, music of Hungarian composer Miklos Rozsa, and a second half of an exciting premiere of new piano music by the Hungarian composer Péter Wolf. So this is a celebration of many, many things, a very nostalgic recital in some ways, a very special program, very special event for me. And I'm so happy to be able to talk to you about it today.
Absolutely. In fact, we've got a little preview of one of the works by that Hungarian composer, Péter Wolf. This is a work called Adagio that you and I filmed together at your studio at Temple University a couple of years ago, and thought it'd be a nice prelude for folks who are not familiar with his music to get a taste of what's in store for the recital. Can we go ahead and share that video?
Sure, absolutely.
What beautiful, beautiful, haunting music. I'm so excited to dive into a little bit more about Peter Wolf's music as well as Miklos Rózsa's music. These are two composers I'm sure a lot of folks are not very familiar with. And so, fortunately, you're sitting right by your piano. And by the way, you are a Yamaha artist, and it aligns very nicely with what we do here at Cunningham Piano, having been the Yamaha Dealer of the Year a few years back. And we're very proud to represent Yamaha and Bösendorfer, and, of course, to be able to talk to such an esteemed Yamaha artist as yourself. In fact, I think you were one of the very first Yamaha artists in the USA. Is that correct?
It's a long and torturous history in some ways. When I was about 10 years old, growing up in Baltimore, my piano teacher, whose name was Ronaldo Reyes, he was a Filipino pianist, told my mother that it was time we had got a really good instrument for me to practice on. We had sort of a beaten up used piano before then. And we went piano shopping, and I went to various homes, and we weren't very well off. We didn't have a lot of money to spend. And I remember looking at a Steinway and a Baldwin and a Mason and Hamlin. And then we went to the home of a priest who was selling this Yamaha C3 piano. And I had never heard of that brand. My mother didn't know it. And I played it, and I liked it a lot. And we asked my piano teacher, is it safe to buy that? Because it's made in Japan. Now, you have to remember in the year 1970, the things that we knew that were made in Japan were cheap tin toys, And there were plenty of people who probably thought the Japanese couldn't even build a piano. And fortunately for us, Mr. Reyes, who had traveled all over Asia, he said, well, it's a top piano, and that's a great bargain you're getting there. So I grew up playing this Yamaha piano at a time when most people just didn't know those instruments. So in my mid-20s, I went to the Tchaikovsky competition and happened to go the very first year that Yamaha sent one of their 9-foot pianos, a Yamaha CF3. And I ended up being the very first and only competitor in that competition who played that instrument. So at the end of the competition, Mr. Murakami, who was a celebrated technician with the firm, invited me on a concert tour of Japan to play a lot of Yamaha. And I had such a marvelous time. I asked him at that time, I was playing a different piano at that time professionally. I asked him if I could be the first Yamaha artist. And he said, well, you won't be the first. He said, there's a few people before you. There's Glenn Gould, Sviatoslav Richter, and Andre Watts. And I thought, that's not bad company. So I've been playing Yamaha since 1987 professionally. I'm very proud of that association.
That's wonderful. And it's interesting, too, that most people probably don't realize here in the United States that Yamaha has been building acoustic pianos since 1900. So they've had a lot of experience refining and building their pianos and continuing to make improvements. And, of course, having wonderful artists like you on their roster. What a joy. Anyway, I wanted to move away and let's focus a little bit about this amazing program. Now, you're playing some works, as you mentioned, of Mozart, and one of the, some really wonderful works. One of the things that I've admired about you in the years that I've known you is that your programs are always so interesting. You always manage to find these gems that not many people play and that should be listened to. And for example, I'm looking at this Minuet and Trio in D major, Commercial 355. That was actually an incomplete work, and it was completed by Paul Badur Skoda. So tell us a little bit about that piece. I'm curious about that one.
Well, that minuet in D and the accompanying Eine kleine Giga in G major are two pieces that Mozart had in his personal notebook and clearly did not intend ever to be published. They were sort of experiments. So he was sort of playing with notes, shall we say. And, Mozart loved his games and so forth. And the minuet has this startling modulation at its very beginning, which no composer of the time would have thought of, or certainly thought of as acceptable in any way. It starts as ordinary as you could get. Okay, so that's D major. I'm expecting a modulation. Let me, in fact, play a little game with you. I'll play the opening of that minuet and then maybe complete it in, I don't know, as Dittersdorf might have done it. highly
Whoa. That
controversial.
doesn't. That's incredible. Wow.
It is really incredible. And, one of the things that happens to our ears in a concert, I'm afraid to say, is that, we see the name of Mozart. So even when you hear something that's really that startling, doesn't strike us as startling because, that's Mozart, that's Mozart. But when you put it in the context of its time, you realize how revolutionary that really was. And even Wolfgang understood that there was no way he would get a publisher ever to publish that thing. It's a chromatic 3-part sequence. That in turn is then matched by the jig that follows, which has a most remarkable kind of compositional idea behind it. If I play it, you hear there's something kind of quirky and strange about that. A jig is a kind of a joyous dance. So we can all hear it's contrapuntal and imitative, but it's the nature of the theme that is the most startling thing about it. Because if we just start holding notes down, let's see, we got E, so that's 3 notes. Then he goes to the G, that's a repeated note, F sharp. In short order, we find that in the course of the first 2 bars of the piece, played slowly, Wolfgang Mozart has used 11 of the 12 available tones.
So I was thinking, like, this is early 12-tone music. That's crazy.
Exactly. He was thinking, can I make a theme that uses all 12 tones? And of course, he didn't have the concept that it could be atonal. It has to be tonal. So he only missed 1 note out of that. It sort of blows your mind. And one of the jokes I used to make in various lectures, I would say that it is commonly said that Mozart, who passed away at age 35, lived far too short a life. I would say that perhaps he lived far too long a life, because had he lived another 5 or 10 years, he probably would have composed everything that anyone could have thought of after him. That's the kind of, his mind was 200 years ahead of his time. So that's
Reminds me a little bit of Leonardo da Vinci, where you have this gentleman who was hundreds of years ahead of his time in terms of his engineering and artistic and so many and physiological insights. I mean, and I love how your introduction and your explanation helps us to, we take Mozart's genius for granted, but this kind of demonstration, this kind of work really brings that genius to the absolute fore.
I think I was concerned when I thought of the program. It's basically focused around the second half of this premiere of 14 pieces from the 48 pieces of Peter Wolf's, what he calls his Wolf-tempered clavier. Wonderful little wordplay right there. But the idea of new music and new sounds that are surprising, and Peter's new music is surprising in that it uses new sounds, but also an awful lot of old sounds recollected in interesting new ways. So at first I was thinking, well, maybe that program should start with Bach, but that seemed a little bit professorial in a sense, just to make that connection. And I always love to start with the music of Mozart. It's probably closest to my heart. And I thought, well, Mozart was quite the experimentalist as well. And you could certainly use some of the pieces from that side of his personality. And then another interesting link, there of the Miklos Rózsa Sonata of 1948, a great Hungarian composer who's very celebrated in Hungary. And Peter certainly knows his work well, but is not so well known as a classical composer here in this country. His music, however, has been heard by millions and millions of people since he was mostly famous and well known in the 1940s and 50s as a Hollywood film composer of such classics like Ben-Hur, Double Indemnity, Spellbound, the Green Berets, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's kind of interesting to throw these things that all have these kind of unexpected sides to them all together, sort of tied together with the idea of new but not new, old but not old, traditional and yet not. So that's the subtext in words, in any case, which are never as adequate as music itself. Music itself, when you compliment me so nicely by saying I put these programs together, I don't sit there with a kind of a philosopher's text and think this. Is more like, well, that piece leads me to that connection or that connection. And how do you, more like assembling a collage and thinking how to put the parts together in a cohesive and interesting way.
Now, what's interesting is, of course, Miklos Rózsa. Miklos, because Madalena, my wife, was correcting me. That it's actually supposed to be pronounced Miklos, I think, Rózsa. He, of course, famous for his film scores, but he was very dedicated to maintaining his art music as well. Just almost, I think he himself called it a double life, right? And I had an opportunity to work on his viola concerto many years ago with Roberto Diaz when he was preparing it for performance. So let's dive a little bit into the Rozsa. Tell us, can you share some excerpts from this sonata? Because I don't know this piece.
So I discovered the music of Miklos Rózsa the way probably everybody of my generation who knows it did, and that is by watching television. The movies would be on TV, and I would be thinking to myself, wow, this music, this score in the background, this is just amazing, And then I'd look at the credits, and see who had composed this stuff. So I became kind of interested in the genesis of all that. And I was delighted to find that there was a significant amount of concert music for the piano written by Miklos Rózsa, basically from the late 1920s through the 1950s. And sometime in my own late 20s, early 30s, I started to learn most of it. And eventually I recorded all of it for Koch, now known as E1 Entertainment. So you can still buy that CD, or you can download those performances online. At the time I was learning these pieces, Rózsa was still alive, and I had the temerity to send him a private tape of my first performance of this sonata, which he reacted to with great enthusiasm and great kindliness. And then I actually met the man when I went to Hollywood to play a concerto at the Hollywood Bowl. He came to the rehearsal. He was quite elderly and had suffered some strokes, but we communicated, and it was a very touching, unforgettable kind of experience to know that he was able to hear that performance of the sonata. He heard me play his Spellbound concerto, and I think all the other piano pieces at the time I recorded them. So I felt like that was a very, very wonderful thing. In terms of the piano sonata itself, it has a lot of the sort of this sensuous and, shall we say, Art Deco style drama of his film scores like Double Indemnity, kind of an atmosphere of bourbon-fueled cigarette smoke, shall we say.
How cool.
Not great artfulness, and appropriate to this particular program because of so much counterpoint going on. If I play the very opening of the sonata, you'll hear how clearly the two hands are playing rather simple themes that nevertheless impress themselves into your brain very, very quickly. He was a great, great melodist, of course, since he had to be for the films. But here it's almost quite Bachian how he begins this piece. So it has this dark and sultry kind of air, but it starts with those simple two lines, and we hear very, very clearly the imitation that's going on. And he uses that Bachian technique all throughout the piece. And the minute the chords really begin to enter the piece, there are always these what we call stacked fourths or sevenths, where they're filled in, to emphasize that it's not tertial harmony. In other words, it's not using chords like C major, D. It's always this kind of ambiguous chord that can modulate almost anywhere. And in fact, there are three movements to the piece, and each one is situated in a different tonal center. It starts in the key of D, the second movement in the key of A, the third in the key of E. So the entire basis of the piece is on this kind of stacked fourth, ambiguous kind of nature. So
that is so cool. Oh, that is so. I love it when composers have those little I guess there's structural elements to keep them within certain worlds. But I think the other thing that strikes me about great film composers is their command of psychology. They're able to present music in a psychological way where they have to, right? And even if it's serious art music, you hear almost as a narrative, a dramatic narrative, and the coloring, the psychological thought behind the musical characters. At least that's what the impression I'm getting as I'm hearing this opening. It's just so, wow, ooh, a thriller or something like that.
It is. It's a thriller of a piece, and it sucks you in from the very, very beginning, and maintains that kind of dark, ambiguous atmosphere, even though there are, contrasting passages. I mean, if I play you a little bit of the second movement, you'll hear that it's much more romantic and tender in a way from the opening, which is marked semplice, simple. Very, very beautiful, romantic kind of yearning feeling that comes out of it, which starts from a very Hungarian kind of sound.
So delicious. It's great.
And there's this Hungarian element as well, also in the last one. The last one, which is almost like Stravinsky or Bartok, has a great driving virtuosity to it, starting like this. Very hard driving, quite, as he says, allegro giusto e vigoroso, until the point it reaches when we have this little bit of a musette that comes in, which is terribly Hungarian. Very, very beautiful orchestral kind of imitative elements going on there. So it's nationalistic, it's proud, it's clearly derived from Rózsa's own hero, who was Bartók, of course. And then Rózsa being one of Péter Wolf's great models, then there's such a great sense of connection for this recital. So I haven't played the sonata in a number of years. It's really a joy to work on it again. It's also hard, and I have a lot of practicing now.
It's interesting. Really, thanks to my wife, Madalina, who's Romanian. I've been falling in love with Romanian folk music and listening to lots of, the ethnic types of dances and songs. And I'm hearing that. I'm kind of recognizing some similarities of some of the music I've been listening to, and they're incredible. So much of the music is so virtuosic, right? And just dazzling in terms of the lines, the virtuosity, the improvisation, and the rhythm as well. So it sounds like that's all kind of infused. And I think Rózsa's one of his father was also a huge fan of Hungarian folk music. So I think he got that from him. Let's talk a little bit about Péter Wolf, another Hungarian composer who fortunately is still with us. And am I correct? I think he will actually be at your recital on April 25th at Merkin Hall, right?
He is coming from Budapest to attend the recital. Yes, indeed.
Wow. Wonderful.
So that's also, it's kind of a remarkable connection. This was in the early days of the pandemic time. I received an email from my very first piano teacher. Her name, when I studied with her in the early 1960s, was Veronica Wolf, W-O-L-F, same last name. And Veronica at that time was probably about 18 years old, and she and her family had escaped Hungary, running in their bare feet through the forest outside of Budapest as Soviet tanks moved in. This would have been the 66, 67 uprising, or a little bit before? I'm sorry. Oh, excuse me. I'm totally wrong. It's 56 uprising. So they ended up in Baltimore, my hometown. And Miss Wolf, as I called her, became my very first piano teacher. She used to come to our suburban neighborhood once a week. And she was teaching my older brother and my little cousins down the street and a few other neighborhood kids. And my mother used to beg her, "You got to listen to the little one, listen to the little one," And she refused to teach me. I was 4 years old. And she said, "That's too young to start lessons." Well, apparently, just before my 5th birthday, my mother finally cajoled her into listening to me. And she repeated to me the story, since I didn't really remember it, of my first piano lesson. That she picked me up by my little hands, put me in her lap, and she opened up my brother's Leola Fletcher Book 1 and asked me, could I play any of the pieces? And I played the first 3, 4, 5 pieces. I don't know, just no problem. And she figured, well, I have a good ear, so I was just copying what I heard. I couldn't possibly be reading the music. But then she said she turned it to the end of the book. She said, "Can you play this one?" And I said, "Oh, sure," and I could play that. And then then she took out book 2, and I was starting to knock those off also. And she realized she had, a little bit of a prodigy here, could read music without instruction, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, most kids are absolutely incapable of doing that. So at this point, for whatever reason, with her big toothy grin that I still treasure, she turned to me and said, "So what do you want to be when you grown up?" And I told her I want to be a piano player and a pig farmer. I often say after telling that story to people that I'm so glad that at least one of my life's goals actually did come through, and there's still a few years left. We might make good on the other part of that in time. Who knows?
In fact, you recently had a one-woman show entitled "Of Pigs and Pianos," which is a one-woman tour de force retrospective of your life. And I remember the wonderful title of this play, and you've actually had a chance to perform it a few times, right? It was premiered in New York City.
I gave the premiere in New York. We also did it for a run of shows in Minneapolis, and I'll be doing it soon after this concert. I'm doing it again in Indianapolis, and hopefully many more places after that too. That's a lot of fun to do that show. And of course, the title is taken from that first encounter at the piano with Miss Wolf. Now, I never knew Miss Wolf's relatives were musical at all. I knew her parents, who we got to know when I was young, but the rest of her relatives, I had no idea. But there at the very beginning of the COVID time, I got this email from Miss Wolf, who is now Ms. Veronica Cohen, and she's one of the deans of the Jerusalem School of Music and Dance. She's been living in Israel for a long, long time now. And she sent me some links to 4 or 5 piano pieces as well as scores. And she said, "You might be interested in these pieces by my cousin Peter, who still lives in Hungary. Tell me what you think of these pieces." And I opened up that music, and the very first of those pieces I played was that Adagio that you opened the show with. And it just melted my heart immediately. And in the midst of this terrible, terrible pandemic time, it was such a scary time, a frightening time, a depressing time. Here was this golden ray of sunshine from my earliest childhood coming to it was like a warm blanket on my soul. And I learned that piece in a matter of days. In fact, I phoned you right away. We filmed that just a few days after I had learned the piece, and then several others. And then she put me in touch with Peter, and we corresponded. And I've played almost all of the 48 pieces from the 2 books of the Wolf Tempered Clavier for him over Zoom. And learning those pieces was one of my big projects during the Zoom period. During the Zoom period.
That's what everybody knows it as, the Zoom period.
The COVID-Zoom era. Yeah, it was one of my big projects. Was dialing into Budapest once a week to see Peter and his wife and play the pieces for him. And then I guess it was the summer before last, I had a concert in Portugal and then also in Italy, and I made a trip to Budapest, which I had never really gone to before. And I spent a week in Budapest with Peter and his whole family, and again, played for him a bit, and we walked all over the city and traveled around a whole bunch, and got to see the country of Hungary. And it's really something. I mean, to be a pianist means that your homeland becomes a big, big chunk of the world. I think of Prague as home. I think of New York as home. I think of Japan as one of my homes. Hawaii is another home. I mean, all these places I've met so many musicians and have people who are like family to me. And now Budapest is almost like a home as well. Sure. Even though I cannot speak one single word of that impenetrable language. I had to ask Peter a million times how to pronounce some of the works in that wolf-tempered clavier. And
So
then,
could we
okay,
get a little preview of some of the pieces? I mean, we heard the Adagio, but there's several others, and I think they're quite remarkable in their creativity. Yeah.
absolutely. There's a lot of interesting influences there, and much of it comes from Peter's own background. He's not per se a classical composer. In fact, most of his career has been in popular music. He's one of the most esteemed jazz pianists in Central Europe.
Oh, I
And
didn't know
he's been
that.
on
Wow.
television a lot, not only just playing the piano, but also conducting sort of jazz ensembles. And he's done pop scores for films and television as well. And only Veronica told me basically in the last 5 to 6 years, he started to really branch into writing classical scores. He's written a absolutely tremendous violin concerto that I really, really admire in 5 movements. A major, major work that's really just dazzling. And then these piano pieces, which is a big undertaking, and obviously inspired by the idea of Johann Sebastian Bach's 48 pieces called the Well-Tempered Clavier. So Peter puts an awful lot of popular kind of styles into these pieces, as well as Hungarian elements, and there's a little bit of Bach realized here and there, and some of his other favorite composers like Chopin and Debussy make an appearance here and there. So here's a brief excerpt from this movement called the Tanchok, or the dances. And this is in mixed meter of sort of flying 7/8 and 3/4 and occasional 9/8 bars and so forth. And here I think you can really hear very, very clearly the Bartok influence. Etc. Something like that. It's a nice little kind of workout, and you have to practice it slowly to master those quick, very, very quick meter changes, which reminds me of certain passages in Bartok's second piano concerto. So that's one kind of thing that you hear in the Wolf-tempered clavier. If I just sort of traipse through its pages, I'm going to find all kinds of other things. So this one is called, let me butcher some Hungarian here, Odon Castelli, or the Old Castle. And this is kind of a dark atmosphere. He's sort of depicting, some of these old abandoned castles that you do see in places like Bratislava or Smolensk or other cities where the names of those places just seem to be missing a few vowels or something. Mysterioso. So again, like the Rosha, I guess you could say there's this kind of atmospheric, almost film music type thing that shows up in various pieces that have a very descriptive title. And I should have added that all of the pieces have descriptive titles. They're not simply like preludes or fugues. They're absolutely pieces with descriptions, so you can get some sort of sense of what's going on in the music simply by hearing the title of the piece. Then there are some pieces that have a kind of motivational or shall we say emotionally descriptive kind of title. Here's one that I like very much. This is a good morning piece called "Get Up," with the exclamation point as well. And this is again a sort of a Hungarian piece. Sort of throw yourself into that whole dance sort of thing. Get
That's
a
so cool.
yeah,
Wow.
grab a cup of strong brew and then there are virtuoso pieces. I don't want to do this on a podcast. Turning back and forth is not the best. Here's one that's a scherzo. It's sort of a manic, crazy kind of atmosphere. So some of them are quite difficult to play. Others are technically more simple, but all of them with some sort of wonderful characteristic to them. And then there's his own infatuation with American jazz and American pop music of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, which is something I really relate to. And I was startled to find, particularly in the second volume, which he subtitles Jazz Preludes. It's clear in the second volume, a little bit more really pressing that jazz element, which is his original sort of vernacular. And there's this one that's absolutely fantastic. It's kind of a spoiler alert if you come to the concert. But this one is called Sneaker, and you sort of you can see one of those Ked sneakers, at least from my childhood. I remember saw a couple of preachers wearing those things from time to time. And he asks you to snap your fingers in this one. Not throughout the whole piece, thank God, because it's a little bit tricky to do, and I find I have to practice that to make sure it really projects. And in concert, I have to throw the hand the other way towards the audience so they actually see that visual element. Here on the podcast, I'm doing it the wrong way, but this piece sounds like this. Now, wait a minute. I don't have the right equipment for this.
You need your sunglasses for that.
You're right about that. Yes, we'll do this way. All right, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. Ooh, cool.
I love playing this piece.
That is so much fun. Oh my goodness. Sara, this is an incredible recital. And I'm just, again, if you have the opportunity for folks who are watching or listening to this podcast, Thursday, April 25th, Merkin Hall, 7:30, you're in for just an incredible tour de force of some wonderful musical ideas, creativity, and it's just wow. I'm so envious of the folks that will be there in person. I'm going to hopefully be there myself. So I'm so excited.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say. And I should say, add to the dedicated audience out there that, of course, I will be talking as well. I have this ebullient yet quiet personality. I will, of course, speak about the pieces a bit in between playing them. So it should be a delightful kind of celebration concert of the music of Mozart, Miklos Rózsa, and Peter Wolf. And Peter Wolf himself will be there. So who knows? Anything is possible.
Well, again, congratulations on this upcoming concert. It's going to be a wonderful event, and hope to see as many of our watchers and listeners at this wonderful concert. So congratulations, Sara, and I'll see you in New York on the 25th.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. All the best.
Absolutely. For the Cunningham Piano Show podcast, I'm Hugh Sung as ever. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.